So it's lesson 3 of mobile and pervasive computing. So I've gotten most submissions for assignment 1A, and I've already, if you submitted, you've already gotten your grade back. Most people got 5 out of 5. There are a few small exceptions, but in general, the app proposals were good. And also the vast majority of class got their activity mark for participating in the Miro board. So we won't have these activities every week, maybe kind of like every couple of weeks. I'll give you whether it's a discussion board, a whiteboard, or something else that we even just do in class that counts for that sort of 10% for your class activity mark. So what we want to do today is I'm going to go over assignment 1B. It's due next week. Okay. And then you won't have another assignment due for a while. Assignment 2 is not due until after reading week. And then our main topic today, we're going to look at activities in Android. So we're going to do a little bit more. We're going to create a simple kind of calculator application. We'll learn a few new view components within activities. We'll also experiment with some of the other Android activities, and we'll kind of look at the life cycle. So what happens when we have an app with multiple activities as users navigate through it? So how do those activities, what happens to them in memory, for example? So we'll practice with one of those with an additional template as well. So before next week's class, I want you to complete the in-class activities we do together, submit your assignment 1B on Blackboard, and complete your quiz. And again, most people did the quiz for this week. So next week's quiz will open this afternoon, and it'll be available until next Thursday. So let's have a look at assignment 1B. So assignment 1B is also it's only worth 5%. So you're getting a week to do it. It's not that big of an assignment, only worth 5%. So it's going to be due next Thursday, okay, before our long weekend. So you need to submit 2 things. I'll just update the document. So give me the link to your repository again. I know you already submitted it in assignment 1A. You're basically going to give me the same repository link in every submission. You're also going to submit a PDF that contains mock-ups of what are the activities in your app going to look like. Now, I realize you guys are not graphic designers. These don't have to be, you know, the kind of mock-ups that a professional designer would do. But what I want you to do is plan out and think about what are the activities going to look like for the app you design. I want you to design the look of those first before you go to build them. Okay, so they can be kind of a rough sketch. It doesn't have to be absolute. And if I have some examples, I'll maybe see if I can find an example or two from a previous year of what I might be looking for here. Okay, you do need to do all your own work. You're not really writing any code here. So you're basically creating the concept of the app. So for assignment 2, you should submit what is the database going to look like. It doesn't have to be a full entity relationship diagram. You can use a non-relational database. We're going to start using Firebase in a few weeks, which is a document database similar to MongoDB. Firebase is owned by Google, so it integrates really well with Android apps. So I just want to know, what are the collections or the tables that will be in your database? I don't need a full diagram, just a list. You're going to create mock-ups for the activities and create the actual project. There doesn't have to be working code, but you need to have created the Android Studio project and pushed it up to your repository. So you have basically an application shell. So you'll submit an initial list, and you can just put this right in like the submission box. I think there's a comment box on Blackboard. You can just submit the list of tables there, the list of collections. So use any design tool you like and create mockups in a single document in PDF format. So if you have 4 activities in your app, please don't submit 4 separate files. Create one PDF that contains the 4 mockups. And then create your new project and push it to GitHub. You should have some explanation in your README file of what is your app. How does it work? Okay. So a list of the collections in your database, the mockups, and the Git repository. I am going to see if I might have an example of the mockups. I may not. I'm not sure. Doesn't look like I do, but they can be fairly rough. Just an idea so that you start to think about what activities do I need, and roughly what components, what views are going to go on each activity. So that's what I'd like to see. I've also included a link here to this article on buildfire.com. It actually offers a number of tools. Some of these are way too advanced. You don't need any of these, but some of these include some simple wireframe tools. I don't care what you use. You can create your mockups in Microsoft Paint if you like. You know, it's not a graphic design course. Okay, just reading your questions. Yes, you can use anything you like for a database. We're going to use Firebase in class, and I'm going to recommend Firebase because there are built-in tools in Android Studio for connecting and configuring Firebase. So you're free to use another database if you like, but the onus is going to be on you to connect to it and configure it. So you can also use SQLite. It's also another popular option. Firebase probably going to be the easiest. Can we draw out a mockup? Yeah, absolutely. You can use any tool you like. You can draw the screens in Word if you like. I'm not putting any restriction on how you have to create the mockups. The basic idea is next week when I look at your mockup, I should have you're providing me with a visual picture of here's a rough idea of what the app will actually look like when it's downloaded and installed. Okay. You don't need to make pixel perfect design. Andrew, I'm looking for the screens and what will be on each screen. So, what will the login screen look like, for example? If you have a list of data, how might you show that list? Does that answer your question, Andrew? Okay. Lalit, you don't even need the columns in the database. You have one database. You said names of databases. There's only one database, but you'll have different collections in the database. You guys have worked with MongoDB before. You know NoSQL databases have collections, not tables. So what are the collections? So if you're building a student management app, which I think someone has proposed, you would have collections like students, courses, and instructors. Okay, I don't need to know the different fields in those collections. I just want to know what collections will the database contain. Does that make sense, Lalit? Okay. So it can just be a list, 1, 2, 3, with the names of the collections that your app is going to need. So I'm not asking you to plan the database or the user interface in, exact precise detail. I'm asking for a rough plan. Yes, absolutely, Kartika. This is why I'm not requiring it to be a super specific plan. Absolutely, you're allowed to modify it. I would expect as you're building, you may realize I don't need that collection, or something I put in my mock-up isn't going to work, or I needed to found a better way to do it. That's fine. You are free to deviate from your plan, but it's to give you some guidance, because generally making decisions about how we're building things while we're actually building is a difficult task. It makes sense to try to make a lot of those planning decisions first, and then we try and build to the plan, keeping in mind that we have to be flexible. So that's a really good question. Thank you for bringing that up. So you're absolutely not going to lose marks if an activity in your app, your final app, looks different from something in your mock-up. But I'm asking you to think about it and plan it out as best you can now, knowing that over the 3 months we have left in the class, your app is probably going to evolve. It's also possible that, some of you have really ambitious plans for the app, which is great, but you may find that some of the features you had planned on building, you're just not going to have time to build during the semester. So you may plan them. I may see activities in your mock-up that you may not ultimately wind up creating before the end of the term. That's okay. Okay, these are great questions. Are there any other questions? I realize a week isn't a lot of time, but the reason I want your plan and your mock-up submitted next week is to give you more time to actually build the app. If I give you 2 weeks for planning, that's 1 less week you have for building. And I think the building is going to require a lot more thought and effort than the planning. So next week I will give out assignment 2 at the start of class so that you can get going on it. And assignment 2 is due, I'm just going to double check, but I believe it's due after reading week. So I'll just make a quick update to this document. Yes, there is a reading week. No, the assignment and the final project, it's the same thing. Yes, we do have a reading week. I will pull up the syllabus. We definitely do. It is the 8th week of the semester. It's just that we have 13 weeks of class rather than 14. They removed 1 week of class. All your classes have a reading week. Okay, so I've updated the document on Blackboard. They would be wrong. So yes, assignment 2 will be due November 13th, so after reading week. So I'm going to assign it to you next week. If any of your instructors tell you that there is no reading week this semester, you can point them here. Usually there's a calendar here. Bear with me for a second. Here, fall semester study week. It's the first week of November. So it's week 8 as it usually is. This study week usually falls in October because we generally start. So yeah, we have no class that week. So today is our 3rd lesson. So we have 4 more lessons. So it's after lesson 7 is reading week. So we will have a class on Friday, October 28th, and then there's no classes the following week. So make sure you tell your instructors this if they're planning on teaching that week. Okay. So let's have a look at, and I've posted these slides, they're on Blackboard. Want to look at some of the other activity styles and also talk about the life cycle of an activity a little bit. Here. All right, so how many people have we actually got in the class? 29. All right, that's great on a Friday. Cool. So we've been working with this empty activity, which just gives us a hello world text view as a default that we get rid of. There are a bunch of other activity templates. We'll explore some of them, and you're free to use some of the other activity templates in your assignment. Right? So, I mean, we've been using a main activity, which is basically empty. But there is a template for like a master and a details, parent-child. So that can be useful when we have a list, and then we allow the user to select an item in our list, and it opens the full details of that data record or document in a separate activity. We've got a settings activity, and I know based on some of your apps proposals, some of you will want to use this activity as well. So basically when we create an activity, and we've already seen this, morning Edwin, we get a Java or Kotlin file under here, under the Java folder, and then we get an XML file under resource and layout. And the XML contains the UI, and we can view it either in the what you see is what you get editor, or we can edit it in the XML view. And then our code that powers that activity happens in our Java or Kotlin file in the back end. So these activities have a life cycle. So we've done a little bit of coding so far in the onCreate method of the activity. That happens pretty commonly. That's where we've added, for example, a button click handler inside of the onCreate. So when does onCreate actually happen? So onCreate happens the first time an activity gets invoked. So here's the cycle. The onCreate method happens first. Then the onStart method. So it's important to kind of keep in mind the order of operation. So most of the time we're going to add code in onCreate. We have an onStart method. We also have an onResume method. So how does this work? What happens? Well, we open up, let's say, our main activity, But then if our user goes to, let's say, it's paused if our activity is partly visible. So we may have something like a pop-up or a modal window that would put our activity into a paused state. When that modal window is dismissed, or maybe it's a notification that comes over top, so that puts it in a pause calls on pause. When that that mobile is or that notification is dismissed, on resume gets called. Now, if the user navigates away, then it calls on stop. Our activity doesn't actually get destroyed. So let's say we're in master detail, we're in the main activity, we tap on today's weather to load the detail activity. The main activity is stopped. It's not destroyed, it's still in memory, but it's not active and it's not visible. If we close the detail activity, then on restart and on start gets called and our activity becomes visible again. Finally, we have an on destroy, which is when the activity is closed entirely. So there's a description here. So when it's resumed, our activity is in the foreground. When it's paused, there's something else over top, but not entirely. So our activity is at least partly visible, but the user can't interact with it because of something that's over top of it. So stopped is when it's hidden and invisible. It's basically in the background. One important thing to note, when an activity is stopped, the instance of it and its state is persisted. So for example, if it's a form and the user has put values in the form, those form values persist even when an activity is stopped and another activity is loaded. So if you go back to that activity, it doesn't need to refresh its data. It's already still there. And it uses a particular object we'll talk about for doing that. And then destroyed is when the activity is not even in memory. So it's totally released from the device memory. So I've sort of gone over this already. So these are the different methods, and they happen in different orders. And this gives us flexibility when we're coding activities as to exactly when we want certain things to happen. So for example, we might call on pause if we're running existing ongoing actions that are consuming memory. So things like, particularly if they're kind of network sensors, we want to disable those, we may want to call on pause. And then on destroy again is everything to do with the activity is terminated. So let's kind of look at this. Let's look at these events a bit more with a visual. So we open up our app and activity 1 is our launcher activity. So activity 1 opens up. It's the first activity, so we have nothing in the back stack. So we've got some user either clicks a button or taps something on activity 1, or they use the navigation bar, and we let them open activity 2. So this creates activity 2. Activity 1 is now stopped. It's still here, it's not closed. So our users on activity 2, they perform another action that now opens activity 3. So now we have two activities in the back stack. First activity 2 and then activity 1. Now when the user presses, if the user presses the back button on their device, what happens is activity 3 gets destroyed at that point. It's not in the back stack, so we're basically reverting to this state where activity 2 was active and activity 1 was stopped. And if we click back again, it's going to destroy activity 2 and then start activity 1 again. So this is something to keep in mind. If we build apps with many, many activities, we can have this long stack. So programmatically, at some point, you may want to close, if that stack gets too large, we may want to close older activities to save the device performance. It really works. It's pretty much actually similar to hitting back in your browser. So it just takes you to the previous activity and the state of that activity will be preserved. So a few notes about activity state. If you actually call the finish method, this actually destroys the activity, as does pressing the device back button. The activity gets destroyed but recreated in these three instances. User rotates their device. So I'm looking at the app, I rotate it. The activity actually has to be destroyed and rebuilt. So you may notice a bit of a flicker when you rotate your device. It doesn't keep its state as it rotates. If the user changes their language, same thing. It's got to be destroyed and recreated so that it can read the new language settings from strings.xml. Also, occasionally, your app might be terminated by the Android operating system if RAM is becoming a problem. So I said earlier, though, if an activity is destroyed and recreated, the data persists. So variables or the current state of views in the activity, those things they come back. So it uses this object called a bundle object. So let's say I have a registration form. I'm typing on the registration form and I filled out 10 different edit texts. And then I get to a long text area at the bottom, a big text box, and I can't see it all, so I want to rotate my device. So I've got values in a whole bunch of views. If I rotate the device, the activity gets destroyed, but the bundle object, it uses key value pairs, so it will remember all of the text values that I've input, even though I haven't submitted or saved them. It will remember them. So when I rotate the device, the values get wiped out. They get saved first to a key value collection called the bundle object. The activity is destroyed, recreated, and then the bundle object repopulates all of the values. Okay, so it looks persistent to the user. It's kind of a bit of a trick that the values don't actually persist. Yes, that bundle object happens automatically, Kenneth. So we'll actually try that. If we actually, let's try it. I'm going to I'll open up the project we did last week. By the way, that's right, Andrew. It depends how much the app has to remember. So if there's a lot of values in state, it's going to take longer to restore itself after you rotate the device. With a simpler app, it should be faster or almost instant. So let's see. I'm going to open up last week's project. Yep, so this happens automatically. Yep. So it checks the state each time you flip it. It does. So I'm going to run my app. Interestingly enough, in the first version of ASP.NET, ASP.NET remembered your form inputs in the same way. It had a bunch of hidden fields that were encrypted. So if you typed values in a form and submitted it and the form would reload, the values would persist in much the same way. So I'm going to load our app because in last week we had a couple of edit texts for email and password. So I'm going to enter some text in there and then I'm going to flip the device. So now I'm going to rotate the device. So you could actually see, now this is on the emulator, but you could actually see the values get wiped out and then be replaced. We didn't see it. It happened quickly the first, so it didn't happen quite as quickly the first time, but there is a bit of a flash when that destroy and then that reading of the values from the bundle object comes back. Okay. So that is just something for us to keep in mind about how this works. Yeah, I haven't done that yet, but you know what? Hey, we're only 34 minutes into the lesson, so there's still time. We'll get you a face mask. Okay, so let's play around with this. So I'm going to make a new project for today. So I'm going to stop this one. Yeah, changing the language will do the same thing, Misham. So if you change the language settings on the device, it will also destroy and recreate your activity. Yes. So I'm going to go ahead and make a new project. I'm going to pick an empty activity for now. Later on, we'll maybe play around with some of these other activities, at least the basic activity. I'm hoping we have some time to look at. Excuse me. So I'll call this Fall 20 Lesson 3. I'll leave the rest of my defaults. Kotlin, I'll keep my API 23, which is Marshmallow. Somebody actually mentioned in the board had an interesting point actually about that. I'll maybe try to address some of these things through the lesson. Somebody said, well, does it? Yeah. Jack said, they're all dessert names or foods. The idea was, well, yeah, it might be somewhat unprofessional. They were trying to make names that were memorable and fun. The other thing was that the first version, the Android versions, they're alphabetical. So the earliest version started with A. Oh, here that is here. Right, so it started with, they started this, sorry, in version 1.5. So cupcake, donut. So they decided they were going to use sweets up until about after pie. They couldn't come up with something with a Q, so they stopped at that point. Okay, so I'll go with Marshmallow. Yeah, at Q they basically stopped. They're just now Android 29 and 30. So I'll create the project. So what we want to do, that's a good one. They should do that, Andrew. So what we want to do is we want to build a simple app that will calculate tip. So, you're in a bar or restaurant, they give you your bill, and you want to be able to just type in the amount of the bill, And then we're going to let the user choose a percentage, anywhere from 10 to 20%. And the app is going to show you what is the amount of your tip and then what's the total. So we're going to have basically 2 inputs and 2 outputs. So the 2 inputs are the amount of the tip, the amount of the overall bill and the tip percentage. The 2 outputs will be the amount of the tip and the total amount of the bill. So let's build the UI first. So first, we'll go to our activity main. We'll get rid of this text view. And then I'm going to go into the designer. And I'm going to add 2 controls. For the amount, I'm going to add on a, actually, I'm going to pick this one. We want a number decimal because this will also ensure, this will add validation that it ensures we're only allowed, users can only enter digits or a dot. They can't enter text. So under palette and text, I'm going to pick number decimal and I'll add that into my component tree. And over here in the ID, I'll give it an ID of edit text amount. I'm going to add left and right constraints. So I'll drag my right to the right and my left to the left. Or, as I think Hayden suggested last week, we could add 0 DP as both the left and right. It's not vertically constrained yet. That's okay. We will. And then we want to add a hint. Somebody mentioned, and Keon mentioned, having the hint was useful. It's basically like the equivalent of the HTML placeholder. So over here, if I, in my attributes, I've got hint down at the bottom. And I've got this little rectangle here. I'm going to click it. It says pick a resource. So I'm going to create a new string resource. So I'm going to click on plus. I'm going to create a new string value. My resource name will be, let's see. It's got to be lowercase with an underscore, enter bill amount. So this text will appear kind of in a light color inside the edit text. So the name is enter underscore amount, and the value is enter bill amount. I'll click OK. I also want to set, because we're getting numeric values, I want to align it to the right. So if I scroll down in my attribute list, down near the bottom, I have a text alignment attribute. I'm going to set that to text end, meaning right align the text. And we can see our little hint text that says enter bill amount now shows up. So I've added the edit text. I've set the text alignment to text end. Under the hint, sure. So Lynn, the hint is actually near the top under common attributes. If you don't see it, under all attributes, this list is alphabetical. So you can just scroll through. and hint is right after height. So I click this little rectangle over on the right that says pick a resource. And that opens up this resource dialog screen. And I click the plus sign here that said add resources to the module. So I clicked that, I chose string value, and I entered in a name and value. And the name has to be all lowercase, and you separate the words with underscores. You can't use camel case. Okay, Lynn, did you get that? Okay, so we've got an alert here because there's no vertical constraint. So we're going to add, instead of adding a text view for the user to just type in the tip, we're going to add a different component. Under widgets, we're going to click on widgets, and what we want is a SeekBar.
Alcaldía de Moscú, todo el tema de consumo de cocaína, y demás. Trump jugó mucho esa baza de...
So whoever's got their Manuel, I think your mic is on. If you would be muting your mic, please. Thank you. No problem. I'm working on my Spanish, but I couldn't understand most of it, Manuel. So we're going to use this SeekBar. It's a little horizontal slider, and we'll set it to go from 10% to 20%. So we can just drag it. And as we drag it, we want our tip to get calculated and displayed. So let's add the SeekBar. And I'll give it an ID of SeekBar tip %. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to align, constrain left and right at 0. That didn't seem to work too well. Hang on, let me undo those. Maybe I'll just constrain these in the XML. Sometimes I find it's easier to go to the XML. So I'm going to go to the code window. So I'm going to copy my start and end constraints from the edit text. And then I'm going to put the top of the SeekBar to the bottom of the edit text. So if I type top, I'm going to choose app layout constraint, top to bottom of our text box. Then I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to set the bottom of the text box to the top of the SeekBar. So here I'll type bottom and choose constraint bottom to top of SeekBar. So now those red warnings go away. I'll just check it in the designer. So here's our SeekBar. There are some other properties of our SeekBar we need to set. But those are our constraints: end to end of parent, start to start of parent, and top is to the bottom of our edit text. We want to set for the SeekBar a minimum and a maximum. So we don't want the tip percentage, we want the range to be 10 to 20% only. So we can set a minimum value and a maximum value. We also want to set well, let's see what this does. So we'll set the min as 10 and the max as 20. But our SeekBar is very tiny. So we want to set a width for this. So how should we set the width? We can say width. Actually, I guess it would be, sorry, it would be it's not going to be width, it's actually going to be layout width. Which we already have. So it just goes to wrap content. So what if we want to change this and set a certain width of it? How should we do that? What units should we set the width in? We talked last week about DP, PX, and SP. If we want to set the width of this, yeah, let's use DP. And Tim, where should we specify? Let's say we want this to be, I don't know, 200 DP. So I could put it here. I could replace wrap content. Could do this. So we can try that. So now our SeekBar, if I zoom in, not quite, almost as wide as our text view, our bill amount. So maybe what we'll do is, why don't we make them the same width? And 200, maybe I'll make it 250. But instead of hard coding it, maybe we'll use the dimension resource file, and then we can set both of these to be the same width. That way, if we want to resize them, we can just resize it in one place in our dimensions file. So what I'm going to do instead is type @dimens input width, which gives me an error. So I want to go and create this dimension resource now. So I'm going to hit So I'm going to go over to my resource and values, and I'm going to make a new value resources file, which I will call dimens, and it's going to go inside of our resources and values. So in here, we'll set up a resource called input_width, and we'll set it to 250. And as Tim said, we want that to be in DP, density independent pixels. Whoops, this should be at dimen. So the file name is plural, but my resource is here, singular. So I can apply that width, that resource, to my edit text as well. We want to make this also dimen input width. So both of them now are 250 dp. So I've created dimens.xml. We've created a new dimension resource called input_width. And we're giving that a value of 250 dp. We're then applying that layout width to both of our controls. So I'm going to go ahead and run the app now. So we'll see how this looks. Then there's one more property of our SeekBar we'll need to add. So here we are so far. So it only brings up the numeric keypad. If I try typing characters, they get ignored because we've set our input type as number decimal. Won't allow any other characters to be entered here. So we haven't written any Kotlin code yet, but here is all of the XML in our layout file. It's 5 to 12. We're about due for a break. Are there any questions before we take a 10-minute break? Danielle, sometimes if that happens, sometimes the emulator is just can be buggy. Yeah, it is a simple way. You just add in number decimal. So Danielle, one thing you can do is go to Tools and Android AVD Manager. If you choose your virtual device, sometimes you have to cold boot it. So try a cold boot. The other thing you can check when your app is running is in the logcat window. If you change verbose to error, it may show you a description of why it's crashing. So try both of those things. The cold boot's kind of slow. These errors are really not important, not enough that they should crash your app. So try those things, Danielle. Okay, let's take a 10-minute break here and we'll continue on with this when we come back.